Hello everybody, welcome back to another light novel review. Today I'm talking about volume number 1 in Sakon Kaidou's light novel series, Infinite Dendrogram. Now this one is being released by J-Novel Club, so it's currently only available in e-novel format and ebook format. It is a relatively newer series in Japan. It's ongoing still. In Japan there's currently 4 volumes released. The most recent was just released this month, July of 2017. So we're really not that far behind, especially when J-Novel is going to be releasing volume number 2 of this series in August. So one of those series that we're really close to the Japanese releases in. This one is told in the first person. It is a action, adventure, fantasy type series. It does have a dash of science fiction in it because it is based in a virtual reality, massive multiplayer online game. Now in this book we have our main character who creates his username as Ray Starling. He joins the game Infinite Dendrogram. Now Infinite Dendrogram is a VRMMO. It is the first of the VRMMOs to come along that promises that it is the most realistic representation of the 5 senses that you can have in a game. Now, Ray has put off playing this game for about 1.5 years. Being a pretty good kid, he didn't want to screw up his college entrance exams, and so he put off getting into the game until he had secured himself a spot in college. But now that he's done that and he has a little bit of time off in between the start of classes, he's decided to reward himself by joining the game Infinite Dendrogram. Now the person introducing him to the game and sort of helping along at the start is his older brother, who has been playing the game since it came out in the first place. Now Infinite Dendrogram, aside from being the first game that is ultra real, like playing a actual living in a real world, it also has a couple of cool mechanics to it. The first of those is the embryo system. Every player is given what's called an embryo, and that embryo develops and changes and levels up along with the player. Now, embryos can take a bunch of different forms. Some can be the form of monsters that they call guardians. Others can be even like the forms of structures that you can use to take cover in during a battle. In the case of Ray, his is a maiden/arms type. And so what that means is that the weapon he has is a sword, but can also take the form of a young girl dressed in a gothic outfit. She's a bit of a fiery personality named Nemesis, and, well, her whole abilities are based on vengeance, which I find kind of interesting because the whole idea is that embryos develop based on the player, based on the player's behaviors, based on the player's how they play the game, based on even their personality, because let's remember, this is a game that is scanning their brain waves. So embryos add this element of individualization to the game. The other thing that's really striking about Infinite Dendrogram is that it is a living world. It continues to grow and change as time passes, regardless of what players do. If a player kills a non-player character in the game, that person stays dead. They don't respawn when the next player comes along. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they would give you a quest. If they're dead, they stay dead. If you chop down a tree, that tree will be chopped down. That's it. It stays that way. The world is a permanent place where the actions that players take are permanent and stay that way and don't respawn after a given time for the next player. It's kind of this idea of impermanence that gives us sort of that action aspect or that urgency in Infinite Dendrogram. The idea that as a player, if you log off for a long period of time, the world could be completely changed when you come back. The fact that quests are very time sensitive, so if you can't complete it, there's no like going to a save point and then coming back later and resuming it. No, because that quest, if it needs to be done now, either you do it or you fail, and that's the end of it. So it gives like I think as a player, like if you play RPGs, if you start to really think about playing a game like this, it does. You start understanding how that would be a completely different experience than what we're pretty much used to in every game that we have otherwise. There's very few games where NPCs stay dead. I think Skyrim's the only one I can think of off the top of my head, but, feel free to leave others in the comments down below. But for the most part, though, the world respawns. And even when you take actions as an individual in a game, you don't often get recognized by an NPC who hasn't been programmed to recognize that fact. Whereas in this game, you are recognized. What you do, your actions, they go with you. But you can play the game pretty much any way you want. You can be a hero, you can be a criminal. One of the guys that Ray meets, his job class is pimp. But one of the jokes of the whole thing is that because the player is young, there's caps on what his pimp ability can do. And even his succubus, who totally, of course, fits with the whole pimp thing, you got to wonder what kind of a kid this guy is in real life. But in any case, his succubus, well, the most she can do is give really great shoulder massages because he's not old enough for any of the other stuff yet. But if you are old enough for that stuff, well, yeah, you can do that. Actually, you can break laws. You can, yeah. I mean, Infinite Dendrogram as a game, as a guy who plays role-playing games, I find it. This is probably the first game world that I've read in a light novel where I really thought to myself, I wish this was real. Like, I wish this was a game I could play. Because that is probably one of the things that really bothers me about RPGs, especially like MMOs, where you do all these big missions and these big things, and then it just resets for the next guy who comes along. Like, the world doesn't stay altered even though you've done these incredible deeds. So the idea of a game that does that is really enticing. Other things that sort of drive the plot ahead in this book, and that certainly give sort of these little breadcrumb trails that show us that there's probably more at play going on here. There is a mention a couple of times about the fact that Infinite Dendrogram has had a very odd sort of development cycle, that the game just kind of came out, which, I mean, if you see how games are developed nowadays, that pretty much never happens. A game is usually announced at least sometime in advance, usually to secure more funding to finish the game. This one, on the other hand, just kind of came out of nowhere. And even Ray makes the comment that it seems almost financially inconceivable that they're able to sell the game and the hardware to play the game for the price that they do. So we have this idea that Infinite Dendrogram, the game, maybe there's something more to it than what we initially see. Also, what we find out is that because you can play the game any way you want, there are things happening like other countries invading other countries. There are military and war campaigns that are going on. We have characters who are actively acting to try and undermine a country. There's all this sort of conflict going on in this world. And I think the best way to look at it is that Infinite Dendrogram is kind of like reading a fantasy novel. If you forget the fact that it's a VRMMO. It is like a fantasy novel where it takes place in a living world that changes and holds both good, bad, and everything in between. The only thing that sort of makes this unique in the fact that it's a VRMMO is the fact that we can have a player join this world and be completely ignorant of it. Certainly, we've had fantasy characters that have traveled to a new country and not really known that country and stuff like that, but there's always at least some, in an actual fantasy where you were born in that world, there is at least some knowledge that you have. In the case of a game, though, where you're joining in sort of a year and a half, 2 years into its life cycle, you're joining into a game, there is a lot of stuff that has happened that you have no idea about. You don't know what the rules are. You don't know what kind of abilities even you are going to have. You don't know how other people are going to play. There's all this stuff that's really unknown. And in this first volume in particular, that's what really drives this book, is that whole idea of learning, starting to learn about Infinite Dendrogram. What is this game world? How do you play the game? How do others play the game? There is a central conflict where we have clans that are player killers that kind of get involved because, well, hey, again, you can play the game any way you want. I really found this book a lot more enjoyable than I initially kind of thought I would. Initially, when I heard that this was going to be another VRMMO type novel, I was a little leery on it because, I mean, it's not like we haven't had Sword Art Online, Log Horizon, Overlord, Pain to Win in a VRMMO. I'm probably missing a whole bunch of other ones. Well, Rising of the Shield Hero, very, even though it's not directly saying it's a game, it uses all the mechanics of a game. And yeah, I'm probably missing others. But, you know, like we've already had quite a few. It's funny, though, that what sets this one apart is the fact that it's not like an isekai, or it's not like he's trapped in the game. He can log out anytime he wants. That's kind of what makes it unique. Which is kind of odd when you think about it, but I mean, hey, that's kind of how it is. But I found the book enjoyable. I found like this character, because he's a good kid. I mean, we already sort of know that because he put off playing a video game so he could get into college. But even the way that he reacts to non-player characters being put into peril, the fact that because they're so real, it sickens him, the idea that they could get hurt or killed or whatever because of something either that he has done or not done. He worries about this kingdom that he has now joined that potentially could fall at the hands of invaders. He wants to become strong so he can actually do something about that. So we have a character who does have sort of a sense of righteousness and this sense of innocence and decency about him. And it's interesting because usually we'd call that a really vanilla character, but when you put him into a world that has so many possibilities and not necessarily will reward the kind of person that he is, it makes him a little bit more interesting. There's also these sort of hints, and they're very minor, but there's some hints to me, at least what I picked up, that there's something going on with Ray and his brother in the real world. That there's something more to their real world lives than what we know. Because at one point he says something like his brother wears a bear suit because he screwed up and made his avatar in-game look exactly like he does in real life. And Ray makes the comment that that would be really problematic for his brother. And you're not told why. It's just like this one little line that's dropped. But it's the whole book is like that. There's these little lines dropped here and there, little thoughts dropped here and there that hint that this could be a really interesting series and have a lot more going on than what I think we initially suspect just by the fact that it's a VRMMO. Again, it's written pretty well. I should have looked a little bit more into this author, into his background to see if he is a first-time author. I get that sense. It seems like he is another one in the long line of authors who posted this story initially online and then was discovered by Hobby Japan, who then offered him a publishing contract through HJ Bunko, their imprint. So it looks like he's a first-time author, but his writing's pretty decent. It certainly is a lot stronger than some of the other first-time light novel authors that I've had the opportunity to read over this past however long I've been reading these books for all of you guys and myself. So the writing is fairly strong. Like I said, lots of little tidbits that string you along and make you go, there's a lot more going on here than you think there is. Plus, there's some really decent action sequences. Of course, I mean, what's the first thing you're going to do when you join a new RPG? You're going to level up, which means you got to kill stuff. There's a couple of really interesting characters that we both directly meet and not meet, but hear about by reputation that makes them sound very interesting. There aren't a lot of really... this book has managed to avoid a lot of the archetype tropes that make light novels sometimes boring or make you kind of roll your eyes. I mean, we don't have a harem starting right away. Yay! And the fact that he has his embryo, he has Nemesis, who is a girl with him, I kind of see this being more their journey with friends that they gather. I don't get the sense that the harem is going to come into play, but I mean, you know, I've been wrong before when I've said that, so we'll see how it plays out. But even the secondary characters aren't immediately falling into tropes. They don't immediately fall into a category that you can easily pigeonhole them. They're kind of interesting. They're a variety of characters. And that has me really hopeful for future volumes of Infinite Dendrogram. It's not like earth-shattering. It's not like the greatest light novel I've ever read, but it certainly was a lot better than I think I initially believed it would be. And it's really using this idea of the VRMMO in a more interesting way than I thought it would, given that it doesn't have like a isekai or game of death type shtick. So all in all, Infinite Dendrogram, I really liked it. I found it a really quick read. Even though I wouldn't say it's not like a short novel. It's pretty average length, if not slightly longer than average, but I just plowed right through it because I really enjoyed it, and the writing, like I said, was quite decent and kept me engaged. So pretty good so far. I am definitely in for volume number 2 to see what goes on in the next book and to see whether this continues to be a really good series. So those are my thoughts on volume number 1 of Infinite Dendrogram. The next book that I'm going to be reviewing is another J-Novel Club, and that is volume 2 of The Faraway Paladin. Now, I've fallen a little bit behind. Like, this one came out a couple months ago, but I'm still ahead of volume 3, so that's a good thing. I really enjoyed volume 1. One of the best magic systems I've seen in sort of a fantasy type world, light novel wise. It just had a very different feel to it than a lot of the other books that we have so far. So I was really looking forward to getting back into the series. So I'm going to be reading volume number 2. That'll be my next review. So if you're brand new to the channel and you love light novels, don't forget to subscribe so you can check out all of my future light novel reviews, including future reviews of Infinite Dendrogram. I really appreciate all of you joining me in this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Till then, bye-bye for now.